Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about journaling. I have some previous videos on the channel about why I choose to journal and how I go about doing that, and so I will post the links to those if I remember to in the below the video in the description box, so you can access some older words of wisdom from me or personal experience from me about journaling. This is a viewer request video and I'm very excited to talk about this subject. So I was really stoked when one of you asked me in a recent video if I would talk a little bit more about journaling and how I go about that, especially when it comes to getting to know a deck. So for today, most of the video is going to be focused on that, how I connect with a deck, where I might be using different associations for the deck than the typical guidebook has, and where I want to really connect with the deck perhaps in a different way. And I'm going to get into that in a moment, but I want to just briefly discuss why you might choose to journal if you're new to journaling, or if you're wondering why I teach it as such an integral part of learning how to read tarot or to work with cards or just to follow a spiritual journey. So of course, if journaling doesn't resonate with you, then don't try to, fit into something that genuinely doesn't work for you. If you're just not a journaler, then you don't need to force it. There are a myriad of other ways that you can really focus your energy in on connecting with the wisdom from your higher self on your spiritual journey. I have written poetry since I was very young, and writing in journals has been something that's been one of the most healing and deeply meaningful practices for me on my spiritual path. And as I moved into adulthood and was really able to follow my own spiritual path, that journaling became a conversation, a way of communicating with deity, with the energies that exist in the cards, and with myself in order to understand myself and my journey. When I was really young, I would journal to God because of the religion I grew up in. And then as my path became my own, that morphed into really journaling to and with deity and with aspects of higher self, and just it provides a beautiful opportunity to get to know yourself a little bit better. There's something about the writing process that for me helps me get clear about maybe what's mine, what's someone else's, how I actually feel, what's really going on. And it is in its own way a form of shadow work, because you can really just get stuff out and then go back, approach it with a fresh perspective now that you've released a layer of frustration or angst or anger. And then you get more clarity the more and more that you kind of work things out on paper. And this is why documenting card spreads and daily draws, etc., have been really important ways for me to get to know my decks, to get to know the structure of tarot or the structure of an oracle deck if I'm working with that, and to hold it in memory because I've taken the time to sit down and actually write. So if you are watching this video and you're trying to figure out how you want to bring journaling into your spiritual practice, it's as simple as sitting down and writing in your journal. You don't need to buy a bunch of extra things to go along with that unless you wish to. It's not required. Sometimes I think we get all obsessed with the accoutrement of whatever path we want to follow, and we forget that it's really about the practice, not the tools that we use to enable us to sit down and have the practice. So it's as simple as having a notebook and a pen or a pencil and just writing. Let me just see if there's anything else I wanted to add. I guess I'll just say personally, since I was asked to share, I tend to work with Moleskine or these Lectern journals, and I just personally over the years have come to really enjoy the square, I don't know what they call it, dotted. It's not dotted, it's the squared version. I just like the way it looks for journaling, etc. You can see that right there, there's some journaling, and it helps me to be a little bit neater. I've been told many times in my life I have handwriting like an old person or Elizabethan handwriting, and so it just makes it easier for me to be able to read with it squared, and I just like the aesthetic of looking at that while I'm writing. But so I just figured I would share, this has been kind of my fail-safe over the years. I mean, I had easily over 100 journals at one point, you know, from around 12 years old forward. Through all the moves over the years, I've lost quite a few of them, but I still do have a core 20 or so from like really pivotal times in my life that I've been able to keep. It's always helpful to go back and look at the journals too, which is really another gift that you get from journaling that I don't really know if you get from anything else, is that you can go back and look at what you wrote 10 years ago, and you are understanding like kind of where you've come from that point in time, seeing how you've evolved and grown, and also like approach that perspective from a different standpoint now, you know, having gone forward in time. And so that is, I think it's pretty fucking awesome, and it's a real gift to be able to look back. So that's another beautiful thing about journaling. It's a really powerful way to process and also to get to know yourself. So if you are in a time of transition right now, then journaling may be something that you find a lot of, that you get a lot out of, you know, for yourself on your path. So one of the questions was asking, how do you use journaling to get to know a deck? So I just want to talk about that for a moment. Well, for the rest of the video, really, because that's what I want to focus on. When I first started to learn tarot, it was really essential for me to write down my daily draws in my journal every day. And the way that I would do that is I would write down the like a really quick, just, you know, couple words, couple phrases of the traditional meaning that was in my guidebook or my Tarot 101 book. And then I would write down what I felt and intuitively what was coming up for me when I looked at the card, and then anything that stood out for me. And then if something had happened in the day that I felt like really went along with what I had written down during my morning time in my daily draw, in the evening I would then kind of just like make a note of that for myself so I could remember how the card draw played out through the day. So that is something that I found very helpful in connecting with tarot, in remembering card meanings, and in like helping me to develop a daily practice with tarot. Now, of course, I was not a mom when I was spending that much time journaling. And by the time I had my son, I was far enough along in my tarot work that I didn't have to like reference a guidebook every day when I would do my daily draw in the morning. I've still pretty much for the most part been able to continue with daily draws since having my son. He's 8 years old at the time of this recording, but it's a much more condensed process, and journaling hopefully happens. Some mornings it just doesn't, but I always get the daily draw in. So if you are a parent or if you're someone who has a very jam-packed schedule, you know, don't stress yourself out about the journaling part. The card draw is the most important part, but if you can give yourself a couple minutes here and there throughout the day to document things, that can really help you in your practice. So if you're feeling stuck with working with tarot, then what I recommend is the same process in your journal. So, and you can choose if you want to have a separate journal for this, or if you want to have, you know, have that in your main journal. So I have now, as you can see here, a daily journal, and I journal, and like this holds everything in it. This is like personal thoughts, poetry that I've written, daily draws, card spreads, you know, whatever I need to get out and express, drawings, pictures, whatever I feel called to put in it. So this has everything in it now. I just do one journal now for everything. However, when I first started, I had separate journals for tarot and then for individual oracle decks that I may have been struggling to connect with, or I really wanted to work with in a very focused manner and have something I could easily reference. Because so while you're deciding this is something that can be an issue. If you have everything in one journal, when you're like, what did I write down last year? I drew this card. I remember I drew it. I wrote something down. What did I write? Then you have to like find the journal, find the, you know, the entry. That can be a really long process. If you have separate journals for everything, then that makes that process of finding something you've written down a lot easier. However, it's a lot more books to manage. So it's up to you, like where you fall on, you know, how much of an inconvenience you want either storing or locating things to be. But most important when you're first connecting with tarot and you're keeping that journal is I always wrote down at least a few phrases for the guidebook meaning, because that helped me to remember the traditional interpretation of the card. And then I would write what I intuited, felt, heard, saw myself personally from the card. And then I would kind of keep track, just like bullet points here and there, if I had a moment during the day to be like, oh, like let's say for instance I drew the moon, and then there was a lot of gossip going on at work today that made total sense that I drew the moon. That's an example of that, right? So just do like bullet points of that, just to help me remember for myself what the card means or meant for me. So now you have 78 cards in tarot, so that's going to be a process. So don't push yourself, don't stress yourself about that. Just know that you're going to devote some time to that every day, and journaling is a really great way to hold yourself to that, but also again to document that experience and to be able to remember. Now the other beautiful thing about this is you can look back over the years and see how card meanings have changed. I've talked about this before, but Three of Cups is a really big one with that for me. I typically read that card very differently from other people, and as the years have gone on and I've played with, well, do I want to try on some, the traditional depiction or understanding of Three of Cups, and how does that work for me in readings when I do that? Kind of like getting to document and play that out in my journals has been really cool to watch how that's shifted and then kind of come full circle over the years. So that can be another gift that journaling gives you. So it's that very simple setup, and you can get as deep, like if you are someone who loves a very, very structured journal, you can get as serious with that as you want, but primarily traditional meaning. You have a little section for that, and then you have a larger section for intuitively what you pick up on with the card, and anything that came to you as you were sitting with the card itself. Now you can also document your journeying with cards, and I've talked about journeying on the channel a lot. I'll try to remember to post a link to one of those videos as well down below. But you can also document your journeys with your cards as well, and that's another way of remembering what comes through, remembering the messages you receive from your guides and from the energy of the card itself, and being able to carry it out past like that moment. So you don't forget key things that you want to remember, etc. So those are some things that I would recommend that you set up for in a tarot journal, or in your journal if you're just going to include this in your daily, personal journal, etc. Those are really helpful ways to get to know tarot, and you can do the same thing for an oracle deck. So if you're trying to get to know an oracle deck, a few phrases from the guidebook of the, key meanings that stuck out to you, then what came up for you and how that played out. And even just like how you, especially with oracle decks, like how you were able to come back to maybe the mantra or the affirmation, or remembering the big picture that the card was giving you for the day. So that's a really powerful way that you can do that. And I want to show an example here from one of my guidebooks. This is guidebooks from one of my journals. This is from 2017. And I was working with the medicine cards at that time, and I was getting to know that deck. And so you can see that I did this kind of free form here, but there are like key words, key phrases, symbols that the wolf or the teacher card in the contrary draw was representing, and then the guidebook meanings for the reversals, and then some of my thoughts here. So you can see how, you don't have to be super structured like I just mentioned. You can also kind of free form that, but this was just set up for working with the medicine cards. So, and I had this journal for that, and that was the purpose of this. And that was nice to be able to reference back to as I was getting to know that deck. So those are some tips and tricks for how you can do that. If you feel called to have separate journals, or if you want to start journaling about your tarot and oracle deck experiences. I'm going to talk for a moment about what you do when you assign, like when you kind of create your own guidebook for a deck. Now, I don't do this that often. I don't recommend doing it for every deck unless you really feel called to. I do think paying attention to a creator's guidebook meanings is important. So very rarely do I kind of go completely off the path that's been set up by the creator and just kind of make my own guidebook. There are some notable exceptions to that rule. The Chicoli Tarot, the Chicoli Oracle, the Victoria Francis Oracle, Dreams of Gaia, I've had to keep my own separate guidebook of sorts with because it's difficult for me. I'm still working with understanding the structure that the creator of that deck created, even though I love that deck. So I'm not leaving her guidebook behind, but I'm trying to write it in a different way so that it's easier for me to connect with as a reader. So when you go ahead and do that, when you're going to kind of create your own guidebook, because one, either the guidebook is a little white book, which is honestly, no offense, a throwaway thing to me where you can tell not a lot of thought and intention went into it, or it doesn't make any sense, or it's only 2 sentences and it's not enough information. You do want to have, I would recommend you have a separate journal set up for that. And I really like, these just happen to be moleskin, but like whatever version works for you with these like little kind of, they're not throwaway, but they're like lightweight, they're slender, but you can still fit stuff in them, and they just tend to travel well, and I'll end up traveling with these a lot, especially if I'm trying to like make notes and remember things when it comes to the deck. So if you're going to step into this process, you're going to want to have, I would recommend, again, you do you, but I would recommend having a separate journal dedicated just to that deck, and where, you know, you're not like personally journaling in that. It doesn't have, you know, my meaning for card number 4 along with all the shit that went on that day that I was processing, right? Like that's confusing from a guidebook like that. So I would just do the guidebook. You know, this is going to be like your guidebook. And I would have that set up in a separate journal or book. Here's where I would differ from what I just discussed doing in tarot journaling. In the guidebook, if I'm kind of creating my own guidebook in this journal, I don't write down what the creator had for the guidebook meaning. Notable exception, Dreams of Gaia, which, as I said, I'm just trying to like reframe the language in that one, so please push that aside for the moment. But like, let's say Victoria Francis Oracle, I wouldn't write down the guidebook meanings or those key phrases for myself. Instead, let's say I draw card number 4. Because I'm rewriting like my own reference system for this, I'm not thinking about what the creator did now, because I've decided I'm not going to be able to use the deck unless I create my own system for it. So I will write down card number 4 and then maybe the title of the card. Then I will write down key phrases and keywords that come up for me as I look at the card. Then just like as if I was writing a guidebook, I'll do a whole section, a couple paragraphs on what the meanings are to me when I draw this card, and perhaps how they might interact with other cards, either in the deck itself or when working with another deck. And if I am going to choose to write the shadow aspect, which I always choose to write shadow aspect, even though I don't work with reversals, which I'll talk about in another video, I'll always write at least a few sentences on the shadow aspect of the card as well. And I will go through and do that for every card. And then I will keep that book, like what I like to do is leave a little space. So like I might do the guidebook meanings, and then I would leave a whole page next to it so that I can add things to it. So let's say I draw card number 4 in 2 weeks, and I'm like, oh my God, I got this other piece I didn't see the first time. I still have some grace space. That was a funny way to say that. In the journal to be able to write that down and document that as well. And if you have like a 3-ring binder or something like that, that's in a lot of ways even easier because you can just add pages in where you need to. But I like the small, like this is easy to carry around. It's lightweight. It's easy to work with. And so this is just what happens to work best for me. But I would keep this kind of my own journal for working with, let's say, the Victoria Francis Oracle. I would be keeping that separate and working on that. Now you can kind of do a crash course and spend a night and go through and look at every card and go through that process, leaving that extra page for yourself to add further notes in the future. Or you can do it one daily draw every day, and you are adding to that journal every day. Now, again, the issue with this is maybe you drew card 4 2 days ago and you draw it again today. So you'll have to be patient with that process of building your journal up for that deck over time. It's up to you if you want to kind of get it done and then really dive into working with the deck that in a way that's completely disregarding anyone else's meanings or associations except for yours. Or you can take your time and build that over a period of time. And it's different with each deck. I have decks that I have done it in one evening and just sat down and like boom, 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 boom. And I have other decks that I've spent time with and allowed time to go in between with things. And we've built, or I've built my associations with the deck and my meanings for the deck over time. So that is up to how the deck feels to you or your process as a reader and a cataloger in this case. Now, I will say the creators of the deck probably aren't going to love that you're rewriting card meanings for yourself. So I wouldn't necessarily go announce that like I just said the decks that I have done that with, but I really don't do it that often. However, there are just some decks where I can't connect unless I follow my own path with it, and I might really love the artwork. Chicoli Oracle, Chicoli Tarot is a beautiful example of that. Chicoli's artwork is amazeballs, and it's very, very confronting, triggering, and it makes you have a big experience when you work with those decks. However, sometimes the guidebook meanings just do not resonate for me with those two decks, and so I had to really go in and say if I'm going to use these decks and I really want to, and I especially use them for shadow work, especially with clients who've dealt with abuse, then I had to develop my own system for working with that deck. And so I have, and obviously I'm not going to capitalize on that or share that with anyone else. That's a very personal thing that I've done just for myself. And so if you're having a deck that you're on the fence with, but you really want to keep the deck, you really want to work with it, that is a way that you can allow that to happen. But for those situations, I do have a separate journal that's just for that. And if you are starting with tarot, I would encourage you to have a separate dedicated version of a journal just for tarot, where there isn't other stuff cluttering things up, and you can really focus on the meat of the card meanings and you getting comfortable enough with them to be able to remember them as you draw them in readings for yourself or for others. Another really beautiful thing that you can add in to your journaling are associations. So elemental associations, astrological associations, planetary associations. Sometimes it's nice to have an area where you can put all of that down and you can reference it really quickly if you lose track of what planet's associated with the emperor, let's say, when you do a reading. So that is something else that I think is definitely worthwhile, and journaling is really helpful for. I have rambled really long. So I won't hold you hostage up to half an hour for this video, but I do just want to say that for me, journaling has been hugely, hugely impactful on my personal path for my own shadow work and inner healing and coming to know and understand myself. And then in regards to tarot and oracle decks and card reading, journaling has been really important for me to remember what it is I'm learning and be able to reference back and see what things meant at one time and what they mean now, and if that's the same or if that's evolved in some way, which is really cool, honestly. So yeah, those are my thoughts on journaling. I hope that this answered the question for the viewer who asked this of me, and if not, please let me know below, or if other questions come up, I'm happy to offer more clarity. But just remember, like I said, if you're working with getting to know a deck, the traditional meanings can go at the top of your journal page, and then intuitively what you felt, saw, heard, knew, understood can go underneath that. And then you can have associations, whether that's elementals, astrological, etc. And then just kind of keep some bullet points of how the card played out throughout your day, or what stuck out to you as what you walked away from that daily card draw with. that's the system I would use for getting to know a deck. And for completely redoing a guidebook for yourself and approaching it purely from intuitively what you get as a reader, I would recommend a separate journal for that. And again, I would say don't get the author or creator's meanings into that journal. Really let it just focus on what comes up for you and what it means when you draw that card from the deck. So once again, I hope this has been helpful. I'm sending you all so much love and many blessings, and I'll see you in the next video.